Good evening, X Winterview, back again with another brief dialogue with his dear friend, Annastacey. The subject of this dialogue is pride. We're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics, the consequences of pride. A bit of background too, why not? On my way home from the office, in the car, apologies for the audio quality, the sounds of revving engine, screaming pedestrians, police sirens, and the like. The topic follows on in some ways from an earlier topic on knowingness and knowledge, but worth a recap. The biological organism, you could say, has an intelligence that is not yours. It doesn't belong to anyone. It is an intelligence by virtue of its design and function over the millennia. The intelligence includes the ability to survive, to keep itself alive in the environment in which it finds itself. This indicates that for the entity, for this bio-psychological entity, that information of certain varieties is more valuable to it than others. To know where food is located, to know where the water hole is, to know if the enemy tribe are invading, to know if Ms. Smith down the road likes your smile or not, to know if the chief favours you or not, to know certain things have an adaptive function for the biological entity. With the mistaken or presumption of the separate entity, the self, the mind makes the critical error, you could say, not only of presuming the existence of a self, but claiming ownership over the objects of the world, and in particular claiming domain over knowledge, facts, etc. The body might learn cleverly that the watering hole to the north of the village is a shorter walk and less dangerous perhaps, but the water is harder to draw. It learns that the water to the west of the village is closer but more dangerous because of animals and attacking enemies and so forth. So it decides that one of the two is the better option, and this forms the basis of knowledge or knowing. This is something that I know. And then it realizes something pretty quickly, that knowledge is valued with others. To share knowledge creates some kind of social bond and social standing. So based on one's knowledge, I should say, one can have social rank. And if one discovers a secret that is highly valued, then all the more social standing. This is quickly latched onto by the mind, because the self-object, which has no actual existence, is quite a flimsy creation of mind. The mind decides, well, in quotes, decides to attribute qualities to the self in order to bolster its sense of value and self-worth. And it doesn't take long for the mind to figure out that knowledge can be the currency to which it can ascribe value for this self. In other words, the more stuff someone knows, the more self-worth and self-esteem they have. And especially when they get feedback from others, wow, that's really impressive knowledge, then the deal is done. That is reinforced, and that behavior will continue, as we all know in psychology. So, what is the truth of the matter? Well, it works a little bit like this, and it can be a bit of a puzzle to think about. But it's a confusion on many levels, but the most striking confusion here is the difference between knowledge and knowing. Two separate things. The better way to, in my humble opinion, to conceptualize knowledge is not so much that I know, moreover that I experience, if you prefer, being with a little nod to the conceptual identity of this I, or conceded in this case, or just to simply say the experience of knowledge. So the experience of knowledge appears in consciousness or in awakeness. There's no particular reason for this, I suppose, but it does clear up a little psychological distress that can arise down the track if one looks at it this way. All knowledge is unearned by this imagined person. All knowledge is a result of the incredible design of the I just said the word design, that implies God, of the biological psychological organism. This organism is incredible in its intelligence, and this is the organism to which one should, I guess, worship, you might say, using that word very loosely, the incredibleness of the ability to have knowledge. What one is experiencing is the knowledge of the body, the knowledge of the brain that's remarkable, and that the brain is figuring out strategies and adaptive ideas for that body unit, you could say. And so that's what's happening, the experience of the body in action. You're not knowing anything. The mind, however, doesn't stop merely there by claiming some of the practical tools of knowledge. Losing my train of thought there. It likes to try and know lots of things, and this is where it becomes a little bit more pernicious. The mind likes to be the one in the know, because, as I suggested earlier, knowledge seems to have adaptive value, and especially as a very easy way of reinforcing self-esteem. To be in the know, to be on the inside loop, makes one prone to trying to have knowledge over all sorts of domains. It gives the sense of a feeling of control. The more that I can know about things, the more power and control I might have. It's not necessarily true. It might be true. Of course, not everyone is as intelligent as everyone else. There's discrepancies between intelligences between these biological entities. Some are extremely intelligent biological entities, whereas others are not so much. The danger, I suppose, is that the not so intelligent can latch on to theories and philosophies that aren't fully reasoned or a little bit premature in their conclusions. For example, someone who is not that bright might readily latch on to a truism. A truism being something that is an either-or, which is a really basic way, it's a sort of almost childish way of reasoning stuff out. A classic one is, if you're not for me, you're against me. If it's not light, it's dark. Little dualities like that, which they sound a bit clever when you first hear them. And if that's the extent of your reasoning ability, and you claim knowledge and authorship to that fact, let's just say, I know that, then and second to that, it's bolstering your self-esteem, then you've got a problem. Because it's forming the core of your self-esteem, these facts that you wonderfully discovered yourself, then you have to defend them. And the problem becomes rather sinister now, because some of the philosophies are rather, as I said earlier, overly simplistic and not fully fleshed out. You end up defending rather flimsy concepts with others, and we're not talking about just the sake of an argument of defending my fact over your fact. For some people, this is perceived as life and death. Remember, it's taken on, knowledge is taken on by the seeker as the basis for self-esteem and the basis for self-worth, the basis for one's meaning in one's life in many cases. So one discovers a philosophy, they claim ownership to that. I've discovered this, I think it's true, I will now tell others about it. Those who don't believe me are against me. And guess what? Gotta kill them. So it can become rather sinister. So this is the downside of the artificial or imagined self claiming ownership over these experiences that really we should be either holding very sort of tentatively at best or at worst, and really at best giving it over to the body, letting the body take credit. It's not my intelligence, it's the intelligence of the body. It was just experienced and I claimed ownership for it. So you have there the basic mechanics for a lot of social problems and a lot of discomfort that the body-mind can feel if it's deeply locked into this idea of the self who knows stuff, and that's the basis of one's self-esteem. It has to latch on to more and more knowledge, or stay abreast of knowledge it feels, to maintain self-esteem. It doesn't want to be the dumb one in the room, you might say. It wants to know stuff. And knowledge can be quite addictive in that way, to know more. And that's perhaps a little nod towards the role of media in our current society. Not sure if that's true, but why not hypothesize? The other thing too is there's a very apt saying that pride goeth before the fall, and what this is pointing to is that because that most knowledge is provisional, highly contextual, and a good guess at best, that it's and as I suggested earlier, best left held tentatively. If one really latches onto it as truth, I know the truth, then sooner or later it's going to be found that perhaps what you know is not the truth. It's just perhaps a good idea, maybe not even a good idea. And so the risk for knowledge, or the seeker who thinks they own knowledge, is a collapse of self-esteem when the knowledge is found to be false or fallacious. And that's true in a way because of the extreme importance, I suppose you'd say, that knowledge is given by the mind as a way of bolstering self-esteem. And as I hinted at earlier, it ties into meaning, purpose, what's my existence all about, what's my life all about, etc. It becomes a rather, you could say, vicious trap. So the pride of knowledge is a tool and a consequence of not fully understanding what it is that knowledge is. The second part of this, which I've only just touched on briefly, I've talked about it in another talk, is the knowingness itself. What the confusion, I suppose, is that the knowingness is a capacity, you could say, of aware awakeness. Giving it labels, not that they're... remembering that the labels are just descriptors at best. But that is the capacity for knowingness. It's the knowingness that I am that registers, you could say, knowledge or facts or experience, and then calls the experience, with describing the experience in labels, becomes the knowledge that it thinks it owns. It's a rather interesting mechanic or dynamic, you could say. It's far less stress to acknowledge that one is just experiencing thought, one is experiencing knowledge, or experiencing brilliance, and in some cases experiencing stupidity, in that way that you can laugh at your own foibles more easily and not get so wrapped up in the vanity of knowledge and believing that you know something. So there are times when our knowledge is sophisticated, or when the knowledge that we experience is quite amazing. You might surprise yourself by figuring out something quite clever. That's the brain figuring it out. That's not something that you did. It's more that it happened because it had to happen, you might say. And you can marvel at that. And then the next moment you can laugh at your own stupidity for forgetting something that was quite easy, or not knowing how to figure out something that was quite straightforward. And in that way, you sort of, in a sense, that space that you are is more just that, it's just that space. Just the space. It's not a person doing stuff, knowing stuff, and so forth, the way it's commonly conceptualized. Anyway, I feel that's enough talk on pride. This has been X Winterview on a delightful sunny afternoon. Hope you're all well. Comments are welcome.